Hey everyruby! Welcome to the very first video in a Speedpaint series in which I will be talking about the Rise of Nevadora, the characters, the academies, the teachers, everything beyond and in between. This is where I tell you about deleted concepts, ideas that seemed really awesome at the time but turned out to be slightly less awesome than expected when we tried to actually apply them, and scenes and characters that we created over the years that ended up not making the final draft. Before I begin, I should warn you that this video will contain spoilers for any and all of the chapters of the book that are out by now. So if you aren't up to date yet, I would advise you to catch up before continuing to watch this video. Otherwise, well, it's at your own risk. For this video, I will, however, not spoil anything from chapters beyond the first one, aside from mentioning or explaining some concepts that have not yet come to pass maybe. Now, let's move on to the video, shall we? What you can see going on in the background here is me designing the now deleted cover artwork for the first chapter of the Rise of Nevadora, titled Myth or Reality for those who are unfamiliar with the project and just wanted to watch a speed paint video. Back when I made this artwork, the direction the story would take was not completely known to my friends and I. Not too long before, we had made the decision to reboot the story and cut it loose from being just a Wings fan project, and into something we could really call our own. Which is probably something you should keep in mind for the duration of this video, as it explains some of the things going on in the time-lapse. It was this uncertainty about a project that ended up getting the artwork deleted too. And that's on today's topic, as I'm going to be talking about changes and alterations to a long-term project, about deleting scenes and artworks you've worked really hard on for the good of the story altogether, even if it tears your heart to do so. Today, I'm simply going to tell you what led to the deletion of this artwork. As you may know, and if you don't, maybe it'd be wise to watch my video on what the Rise of Nevadora is first. The project is soon to celebrate its 5th anniversary, and as a result, has seen a significant amount of changes over the years. A large part of this is due to the story finding its origin in a roleplay, which, for all intents and purposes, sometimes works out quite differently in terms of storytelling than a book may. For example, you could simply start up an arc completely unrelated to your main storyline in a roleplay at any given point, without worrying too much about the consequences, whether it fits in or drives the plot forward. But you might find such a thing to lead you too much from the plot if you were to write an actual story. When translating our roleplay storyline into a novel format, some of the arcs, characters and scenes we had created over the years had to be either changed or deleted altogether. Other times we had to put our heads together to figure out what to do with certain scenes that were important to the story, but revealed too much about plot lines that would only later come to light. Because the roleplay, at least most of it, was played out in chronological order from a certain point in the story, which wouldn't work for the novel if we wanted to keep things engaging. So why am I telling you all of this? The answer to that question is actually quite simple. The deleted cover art came from a deleted scene, one that took place directly after the events in Chloe's dream. As the scene goes now, Chloë goes outside after receiving a magical necklace from her grandmothers, and she finds herself standing face to face with the infamous Hunters, a group of 3 skilled magicians who are out to capture her and turn her over to the Legion. Chloë is outnumbered, and being a fairy at the beginning of her journey, also greatly outmatched, and she's easily overmastered by the Hunters, who are about to rid her of her wings and send her through a whirling portal. The scene fades out as her brother repeats her name after her one last time, unable to save her. Instead, as becomes clear in the scene that follows, Chloë was saved by a mysterious girl who she then proceeds to sketch while her memory is still clear, and the chapter ends with a conversation between her and Violet, as she wonders who this girl might be. The first chapter has seen a number of versions over the years, varying wildly in setting, tone and even length as drafts went by. The very first version contained a simple introduction and had the story commands as Chloë arrived at Artwell Academy. Another really early version began with a battle scene from one of the chapters at the very end of the story taken out of context, before skipping to Chloë on her way to the academy. Then a version where Chloë remembered a phrase from the mysterious girl while she was camping in the forest close to the academy. Then there was this version where we would in fact start with the dream and then Chloë would wake up on Sylvia, before I finally decided that I wanted a short prologue and should start at Sylvia to introduce you to the realm of magic a bit. And there were some versions in between. But you get it, there have been a lot of beginnings to this story. The dream, though, has been a recurring concept in most of these versions, aside from the first one, although it wouldn't always occur at the same point in the storyline. but it too has seen some changes, especially to the ending. Prior to the reboot, the story had a concept that is now deleted for the sake of keeping the characters from becoming too overpowered, and this would also prevent me from pulling the "a wizard did it" card, or in this case, "a fairy did it." Although, most of the time a fairy does indeed do it. I write about fairies. Get it? Moving on. There were quite a few of these concepts that got deleted over time to keep things from getting a deus ex machina way out of it. But the one I'm referring to now is the one where Chloë was the guardian of some kind of ancient and powerful but very fake magical power that she did not know how to control properly, or even activate. Which was fun and giggles for a roleplay, as it got her into some pretty awkward situations due to her powers only working at random moments. But it didn't really work out well on the long run from a storytelling point of view. You can still see some residuals from that concept in the first chapter if you were to look for them. Her magical necklace, for one, used to serve as a magical object for her to help regulate and activate her magic, which explains some of the dialogue choices from that scene, if you read between the lines and ignore the edits made to suit the current function of the necklace, which I will not give away here, I promise not to spoil anything. And also why the necklace used to be wing-shaped, like in this artwork, as opposed to the lotus flower she has today. And all of this just brings me to the alternate ending to the dream, which is basically just where I pulled that "a fairy did it" card I told you about earlier. Allow me to take you back to when the hunters took Chloë to the portal, because where the scene now fades, there used to be another scene directly after the events leading up to the appearance of the mysterious girl. In the original ending, Chloë was actually pulled into the whirlwind before the dream ended, and while she was struggling to stay conscious amidst the pushing and pulling of the wind and the immense presence of dark magic, she randomly activated her magic, and the necklace would begin glowing. Then there would be this big green light spiraling from her pendant, basically repelling the dark magic and freeing her from the whirlwind, but taking up so much of her power that she would pass out. The mysterious fairy would then appear and hold on to Chloë as she opened her eyes again, explaining that she had fought off the hunters by her accidental burst of magic. She would then proceed to tell Chloë that she had to go through this portal to Arterville Academy if she wanted to stay safe. But that didn't go as planned, and that's why she ended up taking a detour, and how she found herself on Sylvia after some time. But all of this just led to some plot holes taking shape. First of all, the random activation of her magic, which didn't make sense at all, and certainly not when you consider the power of a single hunter should be far greater than Chloe's in her current state as a beginner fairy, even with the ancient magic thing going on. So it just didn't make sense for her to be able to repel the magic powers of 3 hunters combined. Secondly, if Chloë had defeated the hunters before the appearance of the mysterious fairy, then why would the fairy even have to appear in the first place? Her appearance in the dream is crucial for Chloe's journey as a fairy, and will be touched upon as we further explore the story. But the way it was planned out back then added absolutely nothing to Chloe's dream, except for offering a very vague explanation of how she ended up going to Sylvia. It also did not explain why or how Chloe's family disappeared. I mean, did she just abandon them on the spot? And last but not least, it just did not say anything at all, about how Chloë lost her memories, which is kind of crucial. It took a lot of trial and error to get to the version of Chloe's dream that is now up and readable, with the story changing and slowly taking shape over time. So did this important scene in the book, even if the dream is not revealed in its entirety in the first chapter anymore like it used to. I sadly can't tell you about what this scene looks like nowadays, as that would spoil an awful lot about the story and would take away all of the fun of having the revelations unfold as I release the chapters. What I can say, without doubt, is that the scene I have in mind now is entirely different from what it used to be, and will hopefully be worth the wait. It will hold the answers to many a question you might have after reading the first chapter. But let's not get ahead of ourselves, shall we? Much like the dream changed over time, so did the drawing I had originally planned. In fact, I did not intend for this particular drawing to become the cover art for Myth or Reality when I first started sketching. I had intended to do a little sketch off, and do this little sketch of Chloë in what was then her fairy outfit, which is in the process of being redesigned these days to suit the new vibe of the story. Yet halfway through I got a different idea and changed the sketch to picture the scene I have just described to you rubies. And as I didn't have an idea for the cover art at the time and really liked the outcome of the line work, I figured I could just as well use this one. But when I published the early version of chapter 1 back in May, something just didn't sit right with me. Both because the artwork depicted a deleted scene that wasn't actually in the chapter anymore, and because it was still much like the style I had been using for my art prior to the reboot. The way I rendered the hair back then is a primal example of this. And the cover didn't line up well with my other works for the chapter. So, in the end, almost 13 hours of work got deleted in favor of preserving the flow of the story overall. And while it was certainly heartbreaking to let go of this cover, as it was the first drawing I had ever finished for the story, it led me to creating the current cover artwork, one that I am very proud of and one that gives you a better idea of what the chapter is about, while still preserving that spiral of magic I had loved so much about the first one. I guess the moral of this entire story I got you to sit through is that it's okay to experiment a little, both in your writing and in your art. Even if it takes you many drafts and loads of redraws, you get to a version you like. Even if you have to delete some works, they will never be in vain. They will help you grow in your skills and will help you to get to the version you will be able to use for your project if you have one. And with that message, I would like to conclude this test run for the Speedpaint series. Thank you for sticking around to the end if you have. And if my rambling about deleted scenes and artwork sparked your interest, be sure to check out the story on Wattpad. You can find the link in the description. I hope to see you next time, and until then, keep living the magic. Chloë, Joëlle, Frostthorn.